What is up, YouTube? Coming at you with another modern voiceover league. This time, a little bit of a brew we're working on. I just kind of threw together a very, very rough draft, and that's kind of what I'm showing some gameplay of today. So when I say very, I mean I am just throwing stuff at the wall, seeing what sticks. I have no idea. I don't have any expectations. Just cards I want to play, see what happens, see where we're starting at. So this is the opening list for like a 5-color domain shadow deck with the new leyline binding that just got printed. 5 and white. Flash enchantment costs 1 less to cast for each basic land type among lands you control. When it enters the battlefield, exile target non-land permanent until leyline binding leaves the battlefield. So effectively, if you've got all 5 colors of mana or all 5 basic land types out, I should say, 1 white mana, flash enchantment, exile target non-land permanent until it leaves the battlefield. Fantastic rate. Expect to see the card a decent bit in Modern in the upcoming weeks. But we're the deck that utilizes 1 mana things more than anybody, with Death Shadow, Ragavan, Thoughtseize, Inquisition, stuff like that. So I thought I'd see how it works out. So this is kind of our first trial run attempt at Domain Shadow Zoo. We'll see how it goes from here. Let's go over all the bits of the pieces, and we'll talk a little bit about what we recognize could be awkward, what might not be awkward. We'll see. So for our threats, we've got 4 Death Shadow, 4 Ragavan, Nimble Pilferer, 3 Tarmogoyf, 4 Territorial Kavu, 4 Scion of Draco. Yes, before anybody says anything, yes, I am aware that Scion of Draco gives black creatures like Death Shadow lifelink. I am aware of the nombo between the two cards. Again, throwing stuff at the wall, seeing what sticks. The rest of our threats, pretty straightforward. 4 Ragavan, 4 Territorial Kavu. Great in like our red base 5-color deck. Get our mana going with Ragavan. Kavu allows us to filter away dead stuff, to hopefully find more action, filter away extra lands, maybe get some more spells going, stuff like that. We've got 4 Thoughtseize, 4 Stubborn Denial, 4 Lightning Bolt, 4 Expressive Iteration, 2 Teferi Time Raveler, and 4 Leyline Binding is our draw power with our iterations, our interaction with our hand disruption, some removal, some counter spells, Leyline Binding to exile everything. Don't know what's going to work. I don't know what's going to be good, what's going to be bad, but this is at least a place for us to start. We've got good aggressive threats with Ragavan, Shadow, Goyf, Kavu. We've got Scion of Draco we can get online fairly easily. We've got decent interaction. Let's see what plays out the best. The biggest concern for me is going to be the mana base. So we've got, I believe, 5 shock lands: Blood Crypt, Breeding Pool, Overgrown Tomb, Sacred Foundry, Steam Vents, which can, our fetches are all red. They can all get Blood Crypt, Sacred Foundry, Steam Vents. Scalding Tarn cannot get Overgrown Tomb. Bloodstained Mire cannot get Breeding Pool. And that should be it for what we can or can't get. Our Triomes, however, we've got a Savai Triome, the Mardu Triome, which can be gotten by any of our fetches, and Zagoth Triome, the Sultai, which can also be gotten by any of our fetches. So the hope here is that we can pair Savai Triome with a Breeding Pool or Zagoth Triome with a Sacred Foundry to be able to get all 5 colors of mana, and more importantly, cast any of our 2-drops with 2 lands. So Zagoth Triome, Sacred Foundry, Triome Foundry for Kavu, Triome Foundry for Expressive Iteration, Triome cast Tarmogoyf for the Savai Triome Breeding Pool, Mardu and the Breeding Pool, Mardu and the Breeding Pool, breeding pool. So that's the hope, is that some way or another we'll be able to pair up some combination of those four to get all of our colors online when we need it. But obviously we'll have to play it out to see how it goes. In the sideboard, we've got 2 copies of Prismatic Ending, kind of wrap up this 5-color exile whatever nonsense we've got going on. 2 Mystical Dispute, 2 Flusterstorm for the blue decks, like Murktide, stuff like that, for the Cascade decks. 2 copies of Fury. Don't know how good it's going to be, but I figure with a lot of these tribal decks running around in the first couple weeks, might be worth trying out. We've got a decent base of red spells, so we'll see how it goes. 2 Temur Battle Rage for like the combo matchups, the unfair stuff where we need to go fast. 1 Alpine Moon for Tron, Urza's Sagas, Amulet Titan, anything like that. 2 Chalice of the Void, and 2 Wear and Tears. Wear and Tear is one I thought I would give a shot to. Great for answering opposing leyline bindings. Answers Urza's Saga, answers Amulet of Vigor, a whole bunch of stuff. Blood Moons. So we'll see how that goes. Without further ado, let's jump into our first match. While we pull this one up, remember, if you want to see this or other Shadow decks live, then feel free to come on over to twitch.tv/the_control freak. I'll put the description or the link to the Twitch down in the description below, as well as the deck list, record, all that. So, first matchup, we win a die roll. Off to a good start. Look at our hands. We've got no white mana, first off. But we don't really need white with this hand. We've got like turn 1 Thoughtseize. Breeding Pool lets us play turn 2 Kavu off that. And then we can iteration, maybe find like a Triome or a 3rd land to get a Sacred Foundry. Maybe Territorial Kavu throws away a land. And we start working on developing our mana and our spells from there. But the important thing is on the play, we've got like turn 1 Hand Disruption into a turn 2 threat. So I think this is a pretty easy keep. So we Thoughtseize. Good old scam. 2 Dauthi Voidwalker, a Furious Seasoned Pyromancer, an Undying Malice, and 2 lands. So they've got turn 1 Scam of Fury, and we do not have an answer to that. So I'd rather they not have that part. Few options here. Obviously, can't take the lands. I think the Dauthis are pretty redundant, so I don't want to take those and like leave the scam. Seasoned Pyromancer looks like a really good take. Keeps them from evoking the Fury. Keeps them from having their best turn 3 play if they don't scam. But ultimately, I think they're pretty redundant on red, so I think I'd rather take the Fury. Try to make them top deck exactly another copy of that to be able to scam us. So opponent gets a Blood Crypt, no scam, which means we get down a Territorial Kavu on 2, free and clear. And then if we find our 3rd land, we've got this Leyline Binding that can exile something. If we find our white source, I mean. See that up there. So opponent's got their Dauthi down. Yeah. Move this over before I forget. So Scalding Tarn can get our Sacred Foundry. Gives us all of our color options. Just gonna throw away the Steam Vents. I really don't want to throw away something that they can cast with Dauthi if I can help it. But here I can just play the Scion, hold up the Leyline Binding. Alright, so they Grief, pitch a Dauthi. So now I know they've got an Undying Malice in hand, Seasoned Pyromancer. So no Grief's going to come down. So I thought about this for a second. I would prefer to leyline binding the grief and just get that out of the way. But I think I have to leyline binding the Dolphy. They can sack it and get one of these lands that they've exiled, or that I've exiled to their Dolphy. But ultimately, I'm much happier with them having a land than having an expressive iteration or a Tarmogoyf, because as soon as they get that land and they can Spyro, even if they make tokens, I've got 4 in the air next turn, plus like a 5 ball off this Territorial Kavu that now has First Strike and Trample thanks to the Scion. So this turn, if they scam the Grief, I'm hitting for 9 total, putting them down to 5. And then next turn, they've got a Scion and they've got a Territorial Kavu coming at them. So ultimately, I think I win that race pretty well if their plan is just to play a Seasoned Pyromancer. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Make them just sack off this Dolphy now. Get it off the board. So even when Leyline Binding isn't exiling anything, it's still giving us a good little removal target. Alright, so let's crank in with our dudes. Territorial Kavu can throw away this land. See if we find something else. Find our Agvan. They also showed us Feign Death, which is interesting to get back this grief. We knew about the Undying Malice in hand, so that might have just been like a slip up on their part to show us that they drew the extra Undying Evil effect. But either way, they go ahead and rip a Fury off the top. So pretty glad we held on to this Ragavan to dash. If we played it out, they would have gotten a free kill on the Ragavan. But instead, they get to point all the damage at the Kavu. They can't attack because Kavu is just lethal on the way back. We draw a Tarmogoyf, which is fantastic. So now we get to dash in the Ragavan, attack with both, exile the Fury in case they've got like K Command or something in their deck and are trying to get it back or could get it back. Grief on chump block duty. Ragavan hits a Terminate, which I would love to cast, but we didn't keep up red mana. Had my eyes set on Tarmogoyf. But ultimately, like, it could have been better that we didn't terminate, because if their last card was like another Undying Evil effect, then they could have just gotten a free kill on the Ragavan, and we didn't have the Tarmogoyf down. So now we're not attacking into the Fury. But now, since we got the Tarmogoyf, like, we're attacking around the Fury, and an Undying Evil effect doesn't stop us there. Alright. So, on to game 2. This over so I can reference my sideboard while we play. Sideboarding against Scam. I took out the 2 Teferi Time Reveler. They're pretty slow on turn 3. They're all right for hitting something that's already scammed, but on the draw especially, I think they're just way too clunky. Maybe wife might want to bring them back in on the play. And I believe that's all I took out. Yeah. And just boarded in the 2 Fury so that I'd have a better way to interact with their scammed effect on like turn 1. If they scam a Fury, then I can evoke a Fury back and get it off the board. So I don't have a lot of ways of dealing with it on turn 1. But on the draw, opening hand is okay. Like, we got Zagoth Triumph, which means we can get Sacred Foundry off this, get all 5 mana covered. So we have a turn 2 5/5 Territorial Kavu. The downside is if they scam us on turn 1 and take our Bolt, we have no way of getting like a grief off the board. If they furious and it's not a 4/4, then we can deal with it. Like I'll gladly play a blood crypt here on turn 1 and bolt a 3/3 fury. But if they go with a grief, then they'll likely just take whatever interaction we have, in this case the bolt. So it looks like opponent does have a grief scam. Point of note here, if you're a scam player, resolve this first half of grief first. Like, you can still respond to the evoke before it's gone, but see what's in my hand before you cast the Undying Evil effect. Because if I'm sitting here with like 2 copies of Surgical Extraction and you cast this and evoke it and immediately Undying Evil, you can take 1, but I'm going to be able to get the grief, and then you just wasted an Undying Evil for something that like you could have prevented. You could have held on to it. Not that it would have been great against 2 surgicals, but I'm saying that you don't know until you see their hand. There could be something that you're missing, and it's pretty free to just let this first trigger go off. A big punishing point would be like if I had a Solitude here, and I could evoke a Solitude and exile this or something like that. It's just like not something you really need to play into for free. So as we thought, they took my Thoughtseize and my Bolt, but they are down to 2 cards. They were on a mole. Got a dash Ragavan, so they're gonna get some chip damage in here. Exile my Blood Crypt. I find a Leyline Binding, which is extremely nice. So now I have my mana fixed. I've got a threat. I've got interaction for this grief. They can't Undying Evil it off a Leyline Binding. Opponent goes for the Thoughtseize, so I'm going to fire off this Binding, get rid of the grief. So I know their last 2 cards are Ragavan and an Unknown. Last card's a land. They go ahead and fetch and show me. Dash Ragavan. So I'm just like 100% snapping off this block. Like I've got a threat. I've got good draw power in my hand. My opponent's empty-handed. I'll take the trade. And Moto is going to take the slow down route. Go to my turn, pick up a Scion. I'm just going to get down a Kavu. Like, best card to get on the battlefield. Now, I can Iteration, but the only way that I'm getting any better than the Kavu is if I hit a fetch land and a Shadow. And that's like a pretty narrow series of hits. So, when it finds a grief, decides to take my Scion, which is reasonable. Like, they don't have a lot of answers for multiple guys, and the clock's pretty quick, so I'm not against it. Pick up Leyline Binding. I could cast the Expressive Iteration here, but Sacred Foundry is my only untapped white source. And that's something I probably need to take a look at with the mana base. So if I cast Iteration, I cannot Leyline Binding. So if my opponent finds like a Thoughtseize or something, or let's say I like Iteration into land, whatever, maybe the Croxa, I don't know, get rid of my Leyline Binding, and I'm down a piece of interaction, where I feel like if I just Leyline Binding something, then I'm pretty ahead with the Kavu. This Binding might have been a little aggressive, but I figured I was winning the race. They couldn't cast another Grief or Fury right here, so I'm going to get in another attack with the Kavu. If they have a removal spell, I do get to untap with Expressive Iteration. But as soon as they played Dolthy, things got a little awkward. It was like, now I can't Expressive Iteration into the Dolthy. And the likelihood of me finding a land and a piece of interaction is pretty low because they exiled my Blood Crypt to the Ragavan. So even if I find like Fetchland Bolt, I'd have to fetch up Steam Vents. Which isn't the worst thing in the world, but if I found like Leyline Binding Fetchland, I couldn't Leyline Binding. So I would just be giving them an Expressive Iteration for not much hassle. Opponent cracks in. I assume if they had a removal spell, they would have cast it by now. And we're slowly making it through the turn. All right, so pick up a shadow. Great, we've got a second threat to cast out. If opponent hits me again with a Dolthy, then I'm down to 5. Shadow's just lethal. But we're going to get a Kraken with Territorial Kavu. Again, I'm not ditching this either of these Expressive Iterations or the Shadow because I don't want to give my opponent something free to cast off their Dolthy. Like if they Thoughtseize me or Inquisition me or something and Dolthy, I'll take my lumps. But I'm going to make them have that Inquisition or whatever. Then we're just going to play out the Shadow. So as long as I avoid my opponent having a removal spell for the Shadow, recast it with Dolthy, I feel relatively safe. And opponent does not find it. We squeak out with match number 1, 2-0 in the good guy's favor. All right. Match number 2. I just realized that like it keeps the game log over here even before I've started. So I can like see everything that happens in match 2 while I'm talking about it. Hand number 1, 5 lands, 2 threats on the draw, no interaction, no. If it had a Kavu, like maybe I could make an argument for just playing out Kavu and ditching extra lands. But no Kavu is going to be a no-go for me. Hand number 2, 1 land, but I've got Ragavan, Thoughtseize, Shadow. So reasonable. And then if I find any fetch land that can get like Steam Vent, Overgrown Tomb, or Breeding Pool, especially, then I open up like Expressive Iteration and Tarmogoyf. So I'm gonna end up keeping this, and I think I'm just gonna throw back the Expressive Iteration. So if I find like a land, I can get down Scion. Or 2 lands, I can get down Scion. 1 land, I can get down Tarmogoyf or something. Usually I like to err on the side of being proactive if I got to mull aggressively. So Thoughtseize, they played a Grazer on turn 1. So 2 more Grazers and an Amulet. Really not good news for our Ragavan start. So another Grazer. Yep. Do not hit the land, so we're just going to play out the Ragavan. Things not looking very good for the heroes here. Find another land. We can at least get like the Kavu on board, get it swinging, try to filter the hand a little bit more. But opponent's got like Expedition map and everything going. We know they've got another Grazer in hand. They crack this map and get a Teleria West, which I don't think I agree with. Like, I think they should have just gotten an Urza's Saga. And I have like a really hard time beating that. Now I get a Leyline Binding, which could answer a Primeval Titan. Now we have white mana that can help out with our answering of the Primeval Titan with Leyline Binding. So let's get down our chunky threat. Seiju, which lets me shock in this Sacred Foundry, and now I can hold up Leyline Binding on their turn. I'm actually really glad they decided to go ahead and Seiju, because that means that I've got this Leyline Binding in hand that's going to get down and take a Titan, and they're not just going to be able to like kill off the Leyline Binding and get the Seiju right back. So let's ditch the Thoughtseize. Not really doing a whole lot for us here. Like, the way opponents aggressively blocking everything, I'm kind of thinking they expect me to have, like, a Scourge of the Skyclaves in my deck, and they're trying to stay at 20 life. But either way, let's get the Shadow down, keep the Bolt and the Leyline Binding up. Expressive Iteration's great, but, like, I have everything that I need to win this game. I just need to get my opponent dead. So I'm valuing creatures more than like grind ability right here. If my opponent finds their threats, then it's not going to matter if I've got expressive iterations in hand. I'm just not going to be alive anymore. So play Primeval Titan. Go and get an Urza Saga and a Simic Growth Chamber. I like the Saga get here. I think I would have rather seen like Saga plus Vesuva copy Saga. And just plan on like next turn making 2 constructs. Turn after that, make 2 constructs. But I get like the Growth Chamber bouncing Teleria West. But I think that's really hinging on like me not having an answer to Titan. So end of turn, I'm going to fire off the Bolt on myself. I could fire off the Leyline Binding, but without knowing my next draw, I kind of want to like wait and see what it is. Like, I'll be able to fire off the Binding regardless, but if I wait, then maybe something changes my mind. For instance, if I drew a Teferi, maybe I want to bounce the Titan instead and hold up Binding when it comes back down. But either way, draw the Bolt, decide to bolt off the Arboreal Grazer, Leyline Binding the Titan, get in with our dudes. Just ditch the Tarmogoyf away, trying to look for like a Stubborn Denial. Because we know their only card in hand right now is Teleria West. So they'd have to Teleria West for like a Pact or an EE or something like that. And Stubborn Denial would stop that cold. But either way, opponent takes their draw. They cannot draw both a land and a Primeval Titan. So they scoop it up. Really nice to steal that game away after turn 1 or turn 2 missed land drop with a Ragavan into triple Arboreal Grazer. Alright, opening 7, no lands. Talk about sideboarding. I board out the Stubborn Denials in this matchup. If you want to keep in a stub or two to answer like Summoner's Pact or Engineered Explosives, Amulet, something like that, Turn Timber Symbiosis, you could, but I like it a lot better on the play than the draw. At least you have the chance to answer to soft stub a turn 1 Amulet. But on the draw, not hitting Amulet kind of takes a big chunk out of its power. And if your opponent does have like an Arboreal Grazer, you're not stubbing an Amulet on 2. And after that, any chance you have to hold up stub just gets like negated by the fact that they can just hard cast a Titan. Also board out 2 Teferis and a Lightning Bolt just to get some of these slow, clunky cards on the draw out of the deck. Lightning Bolt only hits Arboreal Grazer, so it's not much use. But we get to board in 2 Prismatic Endings to help answer the Amulets. 2 copies of Temur Battle Rage because we're going faster. 1 Alpine Moon to answer anything from like Urza's Saga to maybe Bounce Land or something. And 2 Wear and Tear because they can hit Amulet, Urza's Saga, Arboreal Grazer, or not Arboreal Grazer, Dryad of the Elysian Grove, anything like that. So opening 7, we're shipping back. 6 is better. Scalding Tarn can get Savai Triome or it can get Blood Crypt if we want to turn 1 Thoughtseize. Problem with turn 1 Thoughtseize is it cuts us off of like turn 1 Prismatic or turn 2 Prismatic Ending, turn 2 Binding, something like that. The Breeding Pool does look a little awkward in hands like this since it doesn't actually cast anything. It's just the mana reduction for like Scion and Leyline Binding. So maybe we want to take a look at the idea of like not looking for Breeding Pool aggressively. Like maybe Savai Triome Breeding Pool is not the combination we want to go with. But it might end up being like Godless Shrine and Ketria Triome or something. But then we have to change up like the entire mana base because obviously Scalding Tarn couldn't get Godless Shrine. Think about my mole like 7 times. End up deciding to throw back the Scion. Because if I turn 1 get a Savai Triome, basically no chance I'm going to be turn 2ing a Scion instead of like turn 2 Prismatic Ending or Thoughtseize. So pick up 2nd fetch land, which is actually really nice because that allows us to go ahead and be aggressive with this Thoughtseize. We see Titan, Turn Timber Symbiosis, 3 lands. We'll take Titan as the known quantity. The Turn Timber Symbiosis could be a Titan, but the Titan is a Titan. So they're on the side of taking the for certain thing. So another Thoughtseize. They played out the Turn Timber. They can't play a Titan next turn, so not really a big need for Thoughtseize. Urza's Saga is pretty good. Alright, so here we will Thoughtseize, see if anything's changed. And it looks like they've just picked up a couple lands. I was thinking about holding up Binding here. Didn't realize my opponent's got the Growth Chamber, Turn Timber, Saga. So Castle Garenbrig would come in tapped. They can't play a Titan next turn. Even if they found an Amulet off the Saga plus Selesnya Sanctuary is only 5 mana. Can't cast a Titan. So if that's the case, I'm just going to Prismatic Ending this Grazer so I can start getting damage through. Like next turn, I'll be able to Expressive Iteration and hold up the Binding. But ultimately, after this turn, I just want to like not tap off of Binding again. And started to cast Expressive Iteration and remembered, oh yeah, I don't have another untapped white source I can hit. So if I do find like a land to get Overgrown Tomb, then I wouldn't be casting Kavu anyway. Like, I would just be Expressive Iteration, putting a land into play and holding up Leyline Binding. So instead of that, why not just get another 5/5 into play and hold up Leyline Binding? Like, if I've got the Binding up regardless, let's get the pressure on board. What's Expressive Iteration looking for if not another threat? So with this bounce land and the newly acquired amulet and the floating mana, they do have enough to float 4, untap 5, 6 here, 7 with their 1 floating, cast turn Timber Symbiosis. So here we are hoping to dodge a Titan. They hit a Dryad instead, so we're going to Leyline Binding this Dryad about as quickly as we can. They do have Boseiju in hand. So their hand right now is Boseiju, Castle Garenbrig. But we've got a lot of good draws. Wear and Tear. Ironically, not a bad one. Would have liked to have seen like fetch land or something there, but whatever. Gonna end up ditching this expressive iteration because like I'd rather find some sort of interaction. Kind of like I said last game, we've got the tools to win on board, so we don't really need to play like this long drawn out game plan. We just need to like find ways to close it out now, and the best way to close it out would be to find another copy of Leyline Binding. So here, opponent's got Boseiju if they want. If they blow up the binding, then I have Tear to kill the Dryad. But I guess they just drew pretty dead there. If all they had was Boseiju, then I'd be able to swing back for lethal. So that is match number 2, 2-0-4-0. Match number 3. There's the die roll. Very, very good at losing these die rolls. All right, so again, another hand that I can start off Savai Triome into Breeding Pool, get all my mana fixed. Have Leyline Binding, Thoughtseize. Opponent mulligans to 6. And we've got turn 1 Mountain, always scary, Mog Fanatic. So, assuming some flavor of Goblins. Going to play the Bloodstained Mire and pass. If they play something really scary like a Snoop here, I might have to Lightning Bolt, but more than likely if it's something like a Mog War Marshal, I'm just playing a tap Savai Triome. Lightning Bolt doesn't do anything for me, but somehow we managed to dodge a 2-drop, so it could mean a what's his name? Munitions expert. So we're just going to get down Scion. Gives us a good body on board. Worst case scenario would have been like untap or into turn, flash in an expert, untap and attack. Because if we blocked, then before damage, they could flash in another expert. 0.3 damage at the Scion and then trade Scion for like some derpy little goblin. But when they don't play out anything, we've got a reasonable bit of tempo here. Harbinger comes down, goes and gets Ringleader. So we know they've got a pretty good plan next turn. And if they're Harbingering for a Ringleader, that also means one of their 3 cards in hand is a land. Wouldn't Harbinger for a card that you can't cast when you're staring down like a 4/4 flyer and some unknown number of cards in hand. So let's take a look. Got a munitions expert, bunch of lands. So now the goal is just to race these or this, what's it called? Race the Ringleader. Blood Crypt. So currently, opponent is winning the race. I'm dead. This is 1 turn. They've got 2 more attacks and I'm dead. I've got to untap and attack 3 times plus bolt. Ringleader reveals a Harbinger and another Ringleader. So I know their hand is Blood Crypt, Harbinger, Ringleader. I could just like take 5, fetch up a tapped shock land. But I decide that I'm probably going to want to untap and use like most of my mana. So I'm just going to Leyline Binding this Ringleader. Save the Bolt because there's a good chance that this Bolt's going to end up needing to go face. So let's iteration. Find a Tarmogoyf and a Lightning Bolt. So I wish I had thought about this line more. I was thinking, oh, I don't want to fetch and shock down to 5 against Goblins and play Tarmogoyf. I'd rather like kill something, kill a 2-power guy, get a tap shock land. I should have just fetched and shocked and played the Tarmogoyf. It's like I'm attacking down to 10 here, attacking my opponent down to 10 here. And if I had the Tarmogoyf on board and their next turn was just like Ringleader, get 2 Goblins, I don't care about the hand, play the tap Blood Crypt, pass, then I'm untapping with Tarmogoyf and Scion. Tarmogoyf has Trample because of Scion. They've got a Mog Fanatic, a Harbinger, and a Ringleader. They're at 10 life. I could Teferi, play out, bounce the Ringleader, attack with both. 4 in the air is guaranteed, putting them to 6. Tarmogoyf is 4 on the ground. They are at a virtual 3 with Lightning Bolt. So they have to block Mog Fanatic and the other dude, whatever, the Harbinger. Have to block Mog Fanatic and Harbinger on the Tarmogoyf, in which case I'm holding up a Bolt. They're at 4 life. They block 2 Trample. They're at 4 life. I've got a Bolt. I've got a Scion and a Tarmogoyf on board. And most of their mana is going to be spent towards recasting the Ringleader. So there's not a lot of outs they could have at that point. And if they do just like make an incorrect block or decide it's not worth it to block, then I just have Bolt to kill them. But me getting all fancy, decide not to play out the Tarmogoyf. So opponent is going to play the Ringleader. And play the Blood Crypt tapped. They picked up another Harbinger and Conspicuous Snoop. Something Snoop. And then decide not to compound too much. Just get my tap fetch land or tap shock land. And then this was kind of, oh, I want to cast this I want to cast this expressive iteration. But if I do, then I have to play out Tarmogoyf and then fetch and shock to have access to Bolt. And that seems less than ideal. So instead, we're just going to attack with Scion, play the Tarmogoyf, and pass. And it kind of dawns on me right here that, oh yeah, it's really good I didn't fetch and shock or do anything stupid, because my opponent can play Harbinger, go get Sling Gang Lieutenant, and put it on top of their deck, and then cast out the Snoop. So now I have to respond to the Snoop, because if the Snoop hits the battlefield, then it's just sack 4 Goblins, kill me. And it doesn't matter that I have interaction. They can sack before Bolt resolves and I die. So I have to kill the biggest thing on board now. Let the Snoop come down. They've got the Sling Gang on top. And now we're back to this awkward situation of like, I've got to make my opponent uh, make a suboptimal play. Like, I'm trying to dig back in from that punt of just not playing Tarmogoyf on like turn 4. So we've got Teferi down. And my thought here is, okay, I bounce the Harbinger. I attack with the Draco and the Tarmogoyf. They have to block the Snoop and the Fanatic on the Goyf. And then, well, they can block Snoop Fanatic on Goyf, sack the Fanatic for the Sling Gang, go up to 7, take 6, 2 trample and 4 plus from the Scion, and then untap and play Sling Gang and kill me. As long as they are not playing around like me having a removal spell. So if I bounce the Snoop, then they have to bounce or sack the Snoop right now, go to 7. I attack with both of these. They block on the Tarmogoyf. Take 4, 5, 6. But they're at 7. They lose their board, but again, they just untap, Sling Gang, kill me. So I have no outs. Like, I'm just dead if my opponent just puts everything on the Tarmogoyf and calls it a day. So we bounce the Snoop. They sack it as expected. We're down to 3 life. All right. Crack in. And they only block with the Mog Fanatic. So they are dead to the trampling Tarmogoyf. And just for the heck of it, they sacked the Mog Fanatic. But I think maybe they didn't realize that Scion gave the Tarmogoyf trample. But all they needed to do is put both guys on the Tarmogoyf and say go to damage. And I was dead. Sideboarding for Goblins. Get the Stubborn Denials out of here. Get the Teferis out of here. Stubborn Denials not countering anything. Teferis slow and clunky. Get in the 2 Prismatic Endings. They can answer Snoop, Aether Vial, Mog War Marshal, whatever little thing you need answered. They can answer bigger stuff, but preferably 2 mana is about where I'd want to max it out. Bring in the 2 Furies. Great answer for a go wide board early, and then bring in the 2 Battle Rages because like trampling over Goblins is just fun. I have no better way of putting it. All right, so we're on the draw. We've got turn 1 Prismatic Ending if we want it off a Sacred Foundry. Turn 2 Kavu. Turn 3 Scion. So it's kind of hard to pass up that curve. Scion gives the Territorial Kavu first strike and trample. So if we just go like Sacred Foundry for Prismatic Ending, Breeding Pool Kavu, tap Savai Triome, gives us all 5 colors of the Breeding Pool and the Triome, cast the Draco, Territorial Kavu can ditch away another land. An opponent blesses us with an Aether Vial. So we're going to get you off the board. War Marshal. Not going to echo smartly enough. We're down to 3 cards with a Matron for a Ringleader. So again, kind of assume that one of their 3 cards is a land. It's like land, ringleader, unknown. Here I decide I'm just going to play out the second Kavu. So if I'm going to play out the second Kavu, then I don't need to do anything before combat. But I figure if I just play out the second Kavu, then having Scion with 2 Kavus trampling over and a lightning bolt could give me some very serious damage in next turn. And I'm not in danger of being combo killed with no Snoop on the battlefield. And more than likely them casting this Ringleader. So Ringleader hits another Ringleader. No, it hits just a Matron. Yeah. Fire Matron, Aether Vial, Kinzen. So opponent decides they've had enough. I guess matroning for more ringleaders when your opponent's staring you down with 2 5/5s and will potentially be giving them first strike and trample. Just like isn't where they want to be. So 3-0-6-0. Some plays by our opponents that I'm not 100% on board with, but we are where we are. Opponent reveals Yorion. So this is going to be a pretty awkward hand into a Yorion opponent, because if we're expecting them to be on like 4-color pile or 5-color pile now with Leyline Binding, then there's a pretty good chance we want to like Stubborn Denial or Renin 6 on 2. But if we stub a Renin 6 on 2, that means we're not playing Kavu until 3, because we'd have to play Breeding Pool on 1, Savai Triumph on 2, Kavu on 3. Windswept Heath doesn't help out our decision a lot. Decide to play out the Scalding Tarn because I can fetch up a Zagoth Triumph if I need to. Or I can just get like a Steam Vents if I want a Stubborn Denial here. That lets me untap and play Kavu on 2. And all this is really just to hold up Stubborn Denial. Like if I didn't get a Ren on 2, maybe I can get it to Fairy on 3. Honestly, if I could take back these first couple turns, I'd probably just work on like jamming the Kavu on 2 and saying you got to deal with it. Obviously, it would not have worked out too well because they would have had the Teferi on 3, but maybe that could have been like Bolt Teferi, like Iteration Bolt Teferi, Scion Bolt Teferi, something like that. Kind of put some sort of a presence on board. Then I've got Solitude Pitch Omnath here, which is terrifying. If they're pitching Omnath, I kind of have to assume they've got another Omnath. Probably waiting until next turn so they can play it and have the fetch. Leyline Binding's a good pickup. Got Counter Spell. So we've got Fairy into Solitude Pitch into Counter Spell. We do not have Binding up this turn because we had to tap Savai Triumph for a red mana. Ice Fang, thankfully, isn't that scary. Like on the bright side, our opponent is down to 2 cards. Decided to play out the Scion mainly so that I could hold up Leyline Binding. Like I can't play a Kavu off Zagoth Triumph Breeding Pool, so have Fury, which I'm pretty sure is down to like a 1 or 2 of in their deck now. But either way, another fetch is good. So now we can just like play out stuff. And you're about to see the most painful moment of the last at least 2 weeks of my Magic career. Opponent untaps, draws funded growth into you can play the card there. Dress down. Double kill my Kavos. Yikes. And I kind of decide like I'll give it one more draw, but pretty dead here. Like even if I exile the or Leyline Binding the what's the name, Yorion, they still get at least 2 cards off of it. So Elidamir's Call gets Omnath. Alright, I can Leyline Binding the Omnath before they get to make a bunch of mana off of it. And they have a second copy of Beseiju, so pretty sure I just kind of scoop it up here. So they're going to be able to fetch, make a billion mana, play Yorion, draw 3 more cards. So rough one there. But I mean, we were in a reasonable spot, but Dress Down like royally messed up that Kavu plan. And then there was a turn earlier where we dashed Ragavan. They had Solitude pitch Omnath, which was like really aggressive to stop a Ragavan, but that slowed us down by a turn. That would have given us 2 mana to play another threat out on the board. But that's how it goes. Joy of 4 color. Kind of have everything at every moment, right? Sideboarding. We take out the 4 lightning bolts because they don't really answer like anything I want to answer. Took out a couple stubs because most of the things we have problem with are just like Evoke Fury, Evoke Solitude, Omnath, Yorion Blinks, all that stuff. Boarded in 2 copies of Fury just to have another more like bigger interaction than Lightning Bolt. Fury can take on Ren and 6 and Teferi and that stuff. 2 prismatic endings came in. Answer Ren, answer Teferi. Stuff like that. 2 mystical disputes for Teferi, for Ice Fang Coatl, Yorion. And so boarded out 2 stub, 4 bolts. Boarded in 2 prismatic ending, 2 mystical dispute, 2 fury. Check out our hand. Pretty good opening hand. So we've got like turn 1 Thoughtseize if we want it, or turn 2 or turn 1 get a Zagoth Triome. Play turn 2 Thoughtseize, or turn 2 hold up Mystical Dispute, anything like that. So we're just gonna play the Triome on 1, so we can try to like Thoughtseize it to Teferi, or Thoughtseize a Ren and 6 on 2, and then like Mystical Dispute it to Teferi on 3, something like that. But the important thing is this allows us to get down like Scion now, or Scion plus Mystical Dispute on 3. Kind of decide that like if they've got Solitude Evoke or Fury Evoke on turn 2, power to them. But like I'm not winning this game if I try to go long, so my best route is to get pressure on the board like ASAP. go for Besage. I kind of expected that to be just like Ice Fang Coatl block, but obviously Besage's a little bit better than that. We do get to catch our Teferi on 3. Alright, so now we've got Thoughtseize, we draw the expressive iteration. This part right here was kind of a mess up. So I should have cast my spells first. And the reason being is because I don't have something that I'm really interested in ditching. Like, if I Thoughtseize, maybe I see that there's no good targets for Prismatic Ending and I should pitch that. But by preemptively ditching this Sacred Foundry, I cut myself off of like one of my potential lands in my deck that doesn't have that many. So I can get nothing. Or I can get Blood Crypt off this. So I could go like Thoughtseize off the Zagoth. Or I could have gone Thoughtseize off the Zagoth, played Ragavan off the Savai. Something like that, but I feel like I'd rather hit the land so that I have Expressive Iteration next turn for as much as humanly possible. But we Thoughtseize and see Elidamir's Call, Omnath, Ren, Windswept Heath, Otawara. Bit of an awkward spot. Like, I've got Leyline Binding if they decide to go for the Otawara, or if they decide to go for the Omnath. But like this, they're just going to hold up the Otawara. So I might as well go to combat first because my opponent is holding up Otawara. They're going to Otawara me. So my best bet is to just let that happen so that I can like cast more stuff turn or second main. Fairy doesn't do a whole lot when they can just like Omnath plus this Windswept Heath, make a bunch of mana, Ren in 6. Let's get that going. And all we're really trying to do here is like pressure this Teferi and Otawara enough. I'm just destined to have Ragavans, which is fine, seeing as how they're destined to find answers for everything I do. Alright, so opponent has got a Ren in 6 in hand, an Otawara in the yard. Teeth is gone, so they've got one unknown. I cannot stop this Otawara. I could Leyline Binding the Ren right now. That is an option that I've got available, but at the end of the day, I think I would rather just like Prismatic Ending the Ren and get it gone forever. I'm afraid that if I Leyline Binding and they just find like a Teferi or a Besageru or something, then this whole loop just starts again. Kind of have to pass up their expressive iteration value just to make sure I get a lethal threat back on board. So here comes Omnath. There goes Omnath. just sitting here like, please give me a Ren and 6 to ping for lethal. We're just gonna present lethal with two bodies. And next turn, I can like play play Teferi first. So if they have Solitude, they have to flash it in response. Then I can bounce it with Teferi and play Ragavan or dash Ragavan. So the Leyline Binding, my Leyline Binding, so they can get back their Omnath. Gain them a chunk of life here. Verdict away everything and just add Yorion to hand. Kind of a weird turn of events. So Ragavan whiffs, but I'm just like not gonna play around another copy of Supreme Verdict. I thought about like Teferi. Maybe bounce their Leyline Binding, get my binding back so that I could fight over something on the stack. But I don't have another white source. Remember when I said I ditched that Sacred Foundry earlier? And that was probably premature. Yeah, now I don't have double white to Fairy plus binding. And here it's just like, do you have the Solitude or not? And even if you do have, you have to have like Solitude ditch Yorion plus red card to stop Ragavan. But I get to just start my turn with Teferi, so you can't bolt my Ragavan after I dash it. So we somehow end up picking up game 2. Game 3 on the draw, I don't think I really change anything. Board out 1 Fury and 1 Scion. And bring back in the 2 Stubborn Denials that I took out. Because we saw like Ren, Teferi, Eladomri's Call, Leyline Binding, Abundant Growth, Lightning Bolt, Expressive Iteration. So, pretty good chunk of spells that can get Stubborn Denialed. Not like this. Not like this. No lands. Chunk it back. 1 land. Not good. But I have a hard time just like going to 5 or 4 against a deck that's built around insurmountable card advantage. So we're just going to hope we hit land drops. Good Thoughtseize, but I think the only way that I'm winning this game is to get down to like one of my 2 drops on 2. And if I Thoughtseize here, I'm thinning my deck of lands, even if it's marginal, and run the risk of like not being able to get down Scion or something. Them having Teferi is worst case scenario. Like, I'm glad that I chose not to fetch, because at least I gave myself the chance of drawing into a second land so I could Prismatic Ending the Teferi or the Ren. We Thoughtseize and see Leyline Binding, Expressive Iteration, Beseiju, Night of Autumn. So, unless we find second land, we're pretty dead on board. All right, so they've got an Iteration, Night of Autumn, Leyline Binding, Beseiju. And another Ren. Yeah, so I decided just to like pack it up on the second Ren. Best case scenario would be like I find another land. I can play out Draco. Maybe they besage you it, but they probably just untap in Night of Autumn, so I don't get a land. Um, then I run into this really weird game of like I have to hit lands to play my stuff and hold up Mystical Dispute. But Mystical Dispute does basically nothing against Leyline Binding, Besage You, and all their interaction for what I've actually got going on. So, quality of life concession. Move on to the next one. We are 3-1. Not this one. I was replaying the same one. 3-1 going into round number 5. We win a die roll. Heck yeah. And we win a die roll with a reasonable hand. We've got turn 1 Ragavan, turn 2 Kavu. If we find another land, we got a Scion. Or we can always go like turn 1 Sacred Foundry, turn 2 fetch up Zagoth Triome, and be able to play everything. Unless you're me and you decide to get Steam Bents for some reason. So, should have fetched up Sacred Foundry. But I was thinking, oh, I get Steam Vents here. I get Overgrown Tomb off of this. That lets me cast my Kavu if my Ragavan gets taken out. And then I'm just like cruising. I've got the Kavu online and whatnot, and blah, blah, blah. And I should have just gone for like the Ragavan's going to live. What's the highest upside if the Ragavan lives? And that would be Sacred Foundry on 1. Turn 2, fetch up a tapped Zagoth Triome and play like a Kavu off the Steam Vents and the treasure token. Just have a 5/5 Kavu. But whatever. We find the breeding pool, so. And then this was punt number 2. I should have played the Kavu off the Steam Vents and the treasure and gotten my tapped Triome, my Mardu Triome, because I just left this Territorial Kavu high and dry to a Lightning Bolt. Which I don't think they had one since they didn't kill the Ragavan on turn 1. But if they drew into one, then my Kavu is just like dead in the water to it and didn't need to be. I mean, at the same time, if they did find a Lightning Bolt for the Kavu, then that means my Ragavan's living. But whatever, just get the Triome. Get the Kavu bigger than a 3/3. Here we're going to dash Ragavan. I'm going to go ahead and swing the Kavu at the Ren so I can get the treasure token and get down the Scion. And we've seen Ren and 6, Lightning Bolt, Remand, important one we saw there. So we're assuming this is like a Temur Scapeshift list. Typically, Indomitable Creativity plays like Spell Pierce instead of Remand. So that's the assumption at the moment. Let's dash our first striking Ragavan. Nice, the Kavu, you got it. And exiling Valakut the Molten Pinnacle pretty well seals the deal on this Escape Shift line. And then decided to play out the Double Shadow. Again, yes, I know they've got lifelink with the Scions, but if my opponent does end up playing something like Dwarven Mind, Creativity, then I am A-okay sacking the Scion, discarding the Ragavan, losing 3, growing these Double Shadows. But it's kind of like if the Shadows die, then I didn't need them. I was just winning the game. If the shadows live, or if I go to my turn and these are still alive and I find like a fetch land or something, then I'm just winning the game. Whether they're alive, dead, whatever. So I'm not too worried about the Nambo right there. Good old poker hand, not a good magic hand. Needs more real estate. Too much real estate. So we're gonna throw that back. Just the right amount of real estate. It's like the Goldilocks and the Three Bears. Like, this hand is too desolate of lands. This hand is overgrown with lands. This hand is just right. All right. Deciding what to throw back. I really don't want to get mana screwed. Like, I don't want to keep a one lander on the draw in a Ren and 6 matchup and hope Ragavan survives. So I think I have to keep 2 lands. If I'm keeping a Thoughtseize, it makes sense to keep Shadow, because Shadow's online on turn 2. If I just go Fetch Shock Thoughtseize, Fetch Shock, I could keep the other Thoughtseize, but that would mean I'd have to get like Blood Crypt, Overgrown Tomb to be able to Fetch Shock Thoughtseize on 1, Fetch Shock Thoughtseize plus Shadow on 2. And that's a really awkward ask with my mana base. So I think I'm going to end up just ditching the second Thoughtseize and planning on going like turn 1 Thoughtseize off Overgrown Tomb, turn 2 Ragavan off like a Sacred Foundry, Death Shadow, and try something like that. Gives me like the most to do in the first 2 turns of the game. So good at guessing this stuff. All right, so they've got a Remand, 2 Expressive Iterations, a Basic Forest, and a Misty. So if I expect my opponent to Remand this turn, I could play the Kavu. That's the mana efficient play, just straight into the Remand. But I think I like going for double 1 drop here, because even if they Remand something, something's going to resolve. And the hope here is that they don't find another copy of Ren and 6. Which they do not. My hope is I find another fetch land, which I do not. At least get down the Kavu. 4/4 Kavu dodges Bolt. And ditch some of this stuff to try to find another fetch land. So if they're shocking in Breeding Pool, my guess is that they've just got like another Remand. Checks out. But we've got Kavu and Shadow swinging in. Ragavan, you're pretty dead to us now because both of our threats are lethal. And we've got a lethal Lightning Bolt if they choose to fetch. So Ragavan's just pretty unnecessary. Could throw away the Scion too. That would be fine. But it goes for Growth Spiral. Shocks in a Stomping Ground. Go for Scapeshift. If you're not a Scapeshift expert, this is not lethal. With 6 lands, if they get a Valakut and 5 mountains, each mountain does not see 5 other mountains when it enters. So Valakut does no damage with 6 lands unless you have a Dryad or a Prismatic Omen that both count Valakut as a mountain itself. So I could let this resolve. I'm assuming they're just going to get like Dwarven Mine or something to block. But we're just going to take the easy way out and like point a lightning bolt to their face. So that was that league. Ended 4-1. All 4 of our wins were 2-0, which was interesting. Then the loss was to the 4-color pile, where our mana woes really kind of stood out. But ultimately, the deck performed better than I thought it would. I think going forward, I'm probably going to look at just cutting the Teferis. They were kind of clunky. Maybe add like the 4th Tarmogoyf in. And then the 2nd Teferi could become like, I don't know, a Renin 6 maybe. Start like looping some Triomes. And then the mana base, I do not know what the best Triome choice is. I'm starting to think the Temur Triome, but I really don't want to have like Temur Triome and one other land not able to cast Expressive Iteration and Kavu if I have all 5 colors. And Temur Triumph and Godless Shrine seems really awkward. So I don't think I want to go that route. Like, part of the reason I picked Savai Triumph and Zagoth Triumph was they both, with their pair combination, allow you to cast, like, all of your multicolored 2 mana spells off 2 mana. But the, like, Savai Triome Breeding Pool, it's really weird because Savai Triome is all of these cards plus the Leyline Bindings, and Breeding Pool's like only Tarmogoyf really. So not sure. If you got some suggestions, if you have experience with the Zoo decks, please let me know what the best combination of fetches, shocks, and triomes is. I know Death Shadow throws this off a little bit, but we're going to be giving it a shot on stream anyway to try to see if we can make it work. But that's all for this league. I hope you enjoyed it. As always, I'll have the deck list and link to the Discord and link to the Twitch page in the description below. Come check us out live. We're usually live like 2 to 7, 2 to 8-ish Central Time, Monday through Friday. Occasional weekend streams for major events. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button on YouTube. Lets you know whenever new content goes live, so you can come check us out. Hope to catch you next time. Adios for now.